Okay, this is great. I also don't want to start with too much of a delay right at the beginning. So, welcome everyone. It's fantastic to see so many people from so many different places here. We have Saudi Arabia, New Zealand, Madagascar, Philippines, Germany, of course, many people from the US, where the Harvard Circular Economy Symposium is based from. I'm excited for our lineup today, and I will speedily hand it over to Carrie Snyder, who was our faculty advisor last year. She teaches the currently only dedicated circular economy course at Harvard, and she's going to introduce our keynote, and then we're going to go into panels in breakout rooms. Carrie, take
Great.
it away.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And thank you, everyone who put together this session today. As Joanna mentioned, I teach circular economy at the Harvard Extension School as part of its sustainability program. I'm very honored to introduce today's session. I will start with about 5 minutes of background on the circular economy, and in particular, the sharing economy as well, and then I'll introduce our keynote speaker. So for those of you who don't know, the Harvard Circular Economy Symposium was started last year with its first event back in March by a group of Harvard students across various parts of the university who wanted to create a dialogue within and outside of Harvard about the circular economy and help make it a reality. And now the team has extended to more students, and the baton has been handed over, and we now have students from some other universities as well who have joined in. So really thrilled and proud that their work continues with this new set of student leaders, and also really excited about this new series of events that we have to expand upon the dialogue that was started back in March. So just as a little bit of background as we think about the circular economy, if you think about it, a while back when we were first conceptualizing the economy, our system of production and consumption, we were really focused mainly on how businesses and labor sort of interacted with each other, this sort of idea of firms and households exchanging goods and services for labor. I mean, what was often left out of the view in a lot of the ways that we looked at the economy was the fact that it was actually contained within the physical biosphere. And in particular, that's a really important thing to have missed, because the biosphere provides, three primary functions for us. It provides all of the land, the raw materials, the energy, the water, all of that material basis for our economy. And as much as we'd like to think of services and the knowledge economy, at its basis, everything runs off of physical and material goods. The biosphere also absorbs all of the pollution and waste that are the unfortunate byproducts of our system. And then finally, the biosphere has this regulatory capacity for us. And I don't mean that in the government policy sense. I mean that in the climate and sort of creating the conditions for ongoing life on the planet, right? So without recognizing this larger role of the biosphere, we really created a linear system where we mined things out of the planet, we used them up, usually once, and then we disposed of them either in landfills or the environment. And that process, in short, is often called take, make, and waste. And so we're, coming to the realization, maybe some of us have realized it for a long time, that the environmental and the social implications of this linear economy really are unsustainable for us. So the circular economy, in contrast to this, is a paradigm shift where we start to slow and narrow and create closed loops of material flows. And we have this ambition that through that, we'll be able to decouple our primary material consumption from our economic activity as much as we possibly can, and that maybe even ultimately we can regenerate some of these systems that we care about. And so this shift requires changes in so many different areas, whether it's policy or technology, design, consumer behavior, business models. There are a lot of different pieces that we need to put together to really make the circular economy a reality. And one of those changes, and that's actually why we're here today, is to explore the concept of the sharing economy. And so the sharing economy is particularly well suited to when we see waste in our economy in the form of idle assets. And most people don't even think of idle assets as waste. We think of things that, got thrown out into the environment. But this is when we have idle assets, we usually end up producing a lot more than we really need to meet our actual consumption needs. And so in particular, there's sort of three areas of the sharing economy. The first is what's technically in an academic sense called product service systems. systems, this is where you switch, where you start to have ideas where you pay for the benefit of a product where without having the actual ownership of it. So if you think of, there's this old marketing adage that people don't actually buy hammers. They actually just want a nail in the wall. And so how can we think about the goods in our economy in a different way and where we don't actually need to own things? The second area is around redistribution. How do we redistribute used goods to others in new places where they're needed rather than have them sit idle or be disposed of? And then finally, how do we think about collaborative lifestyles? How do we share things more actively? I'm sure, while I don't think there'll ever be a sharing economy for toothbrushes, I'm sure all of you can think of something in your home you haven't even used for 6 months, and maybe that could have been, better redeployed in some sort of sharing model. So as you hear from all of these wonderful speakers today and all the amazing work that they're doing, since I'm an educator, I can't help but assign a little bit of homework. I'll challenge you to think about a few things, not just how these models can scale up, how they can become more widespread and move into more industries, but also how do we make sure that these models actually do what we want it to do, which is to reduce the overall impact on the environment and meet our societal goals at the same time. So how do we make sure that the circular economy is actually in service of sustainability, that we're not inadvertently having unintended consequences, such as stimulating more primary production of goods. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to our great keynote speaker, Robert Metzger, who is the Philips Global Head of Sustainability. Mr. Metzger leads Philips activities in sustainability, where he drives the company's strategy towards innovative, sustainable business models and embedding sustainable and circular ways of working across Philips. In particular, Robert and his team are leading all of the activities with regards to Philips' environmental responsibility, with a focus on climate action, circular economy, and expanding access to healthcare in underserved communities as part of Philips' overall purpose to improve people's health and well-being. Before joining Philips, Mr. Metzger worked at McKinsey & Company as a consultant, where he gained 5 years of experience in strategy and innovation in the high-tech, healthcare, and public sectors. Mr. Metzger has a background in journalism, science publishing, and academic research, and he is married, has 3 children, and lives in the Netherlands. So a very warm welcome to Robert Metzger. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carrie. What an introduction. I just get all these flashbacks from my life, but also very comprehensive introduction to circular economy. So I think that allows me to really zoom into a couple of the things that you mentioned. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things from your introduction also. So being aware of the context of what we do is really important. Of course, thinking about how to scale successful models that we see pop up is really important. And of course, having comprehensive impact measures also to be aware of the unintended consequences and creating feedback loops that allow us to continuously improve is also extremely important. So thanks for setting that context. Let me share my screen. I don't want to have too much PowerPoint, but I think it helps a little bit conceptually to create some background. I will switch to the PowerPoint slides. Share. And I hope that is working. Yes, I see nods. Fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
So 3 things that I wanted to briefly talk about. I think I have 10-15 minutes max or so, and then we have Q&A before we go to the panels. Why does circularity matter? You did a great job, Carrie, in already introducing. I can be short on that. Then maybe how do we translate it in the context of a company like Philips, and what's already possible today, but also combining that with some insights on learnings and challenges, of course, very much in line with the homework that Carrie just assigned to all of you. One way of looking at the context is this beautiful slide here. I think that really puts it to the point. The dots that you see are the countries, and on the x-axis you see the Human Development Index as a measure for the quality of life, plotted against the amount of resources that we use on the y-axis, measured in global hectares. So you see a very clear correlation between the higher the living standard is, so the further we go to the right, the higher also the resource consumption. And the catch really is are these 2 dotted lines. The one is the vertical one that denotes high standards of living on the right, and the other one is the horizontal one that really indicates the one planet that we have. So you see that all the countries that where people live have a high standard of living resource multiple of the one planet that we have. And we know that from the 100 gigatons of raw materials that have been extracted last year. Less than 10% have been recycled, tendency declining. That was in a Global Gap report, which many of you will have seen. So this is fundamentally not sustainable, and we need to find ways to change the paradigm and improving the quality of life while respecting the limits of this one planet. Now, at Philips, we have just launched a new ESG program for the next 5 years, looking forward, and really articulated, sharpened our purpose. Philips is now about 130 years early next year, and we have reinvented ourselves a couple of times, but the focus on improving people's health and life and well-being has been there throughout the company's history, and really we have tried to make that measurable also and say by 2030 we want to improve 2.5 billion people's lives per year through meaningful innovation. That is a wonderful, inspiring purpose, including the sentence about acting responsibly towards our planet, our society, but of course only works if you're able to operationalize it in the context of a company with 80,000 people globally and make it really practical and bring it down to something that's better than the piece of paper that it's written on. As part of that, we have, for instance, formulated now these targets for 2025. That's the program we are just wrapping up, the 5-year program that we are running towards this year. But looking forward, we have said, and let me just zoom in on circular economy, we want to generate 25% of our revenues by 2025 from circular propositions, services and products, close 100% the loop on all professional medical equipment, put zero waste to landfill, and put all our new product introductions through the eco-design program. Right now, we are at 70% global revenues of eco-design products, and by the end of this year, we'll have about 15% of revenues from circular products and propositions, just to give you a little bit idea. So we are on the way, but really need to ramp this up further. That's in the context of the other SDGs, of course, bringing health and well-being, including making healthcare accessible to underserved communities, operating carbon neutral by the end of this year, committed to science-based targets. So I think, again, circularity is really important. It's one of the key enablers also to fight climate change. We know that half of the emission reductions will need to come from circular models. It's not a standalone thing, but it's closely connected to the other sustainable development goals and the core part of our strategy. Now, Terry already explained what it is. It's moving from linear models to these circular models, going far beyond just recycling. If you think about recycling the materials from a telephone like an iPhone or so, then you get a couple of cents for the aluminum and the silicon dioxide that's used as glass. But of course, parts recovery is much more interesting to retain value also in the economy. Refurbishment of entire products even more so, and in the end, it's really services that transition to service models and the service economy that also will retain and create value for customers and society. There are 4 different buckets that we see as main levers. And again, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner, but the things that we focus on here really are making smart material choices in our eco-design programs, and I will comment on that in a second. The second important lever is really thinking differently about design. So introducing platforms, not just software platforms, but also hardware platforms, thinking about modular design that allow effective refurbishment of components or entire products. The third bucket is really about software, on-site and remote upgrades, and thinking about dematerialization. And the last bucket is about new business models, because intrinsically, circular economy is not a product property, but it's a systems property. So we need to also have the appropriate business models, including the logistics and so forth. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples to illustrate where we are, but also where challenges is. You're looking here at the consumer product from Philips. I wanted to use that to illustrate the part of making smarter material choice and recycled plastics. As of this year, we are using about 300 metric tons of recycled plastics in our products. We really launched a huge innovation effort to develop these materials, but also adapt the designs in such a way you actually can handle these materials. Now, for now, most of it is used in carrying structures and in parts that are not in touch directly with your consumer or with food or skin. But going forward, also that, of course, becomes increasingly important. So next year we want to use 600 metric tons, the year thereafter 900 metric tons. And that means that you need to go also to colored surfaces, to parts that have come in touch with skin or food. Hence, you need to really think about the purity, the grade of the materials, and chemicals and so forth. So chemical recycling also becomes more important. We have made a pledge for the next years to use up to 10,000 metric tons of recycled plastics to signal also to the market that there is a stability in demand and that's worthwhile investing in these type of technologies and really driving the circular and recycled plastic. Now, the next bucket that I mentioned is really around the design. If you think back to I think the Air Force One is still flying around. That airplane has been designed in the 1960s or so. And believe me, there's a lot that has been changing in the aerospace since that. So the hull is still the same, but the interior has changed a lot. Now, what you see here is an MR scanner from Philips in an illustrative design that contains huge components like 1.5 or 3 Tesla magnets. The technology of these magnets itself is not changing so much over the years, but the sensors, the software, the workflows are changing rapidly. And if you design these materials or these products in a modular way, then you can reuse components and you make them basically future-proof and have a totally different proposition towards our customers. We have refurbishment businesses globally. We have entire product line that bring in refurbished products and, for instance, medical equipment with full fabric warranties also. And it's a great way also to making healthcare more accessible and offering these type of service and products against a product price that is also extremely competitive and preserving valuable precious materials. Now, I mentioned software. Software is a fantastic way to decouple value creation from a waste of resources. And Gary mentioned it also in the introduction. If you would imagine all the machines or the gadgets that you would need to realize the functionality that's now compromised or compressed in a phone, and if you would put that somewhere in a room, it would probably fill the entire room, starting with a compass and all kinds of things, photo cameras, all the functionality. So being able to realize functionality through software is a fantastic way to realize these functions in a way that do not use material flows and create additional waste. You see here an ultrasound scanner that's basically the entire functionality is compress the hardware into the probe that is held in the hand here of the caregiver. You can plug it into any tablet, and if you have a 3G or 4G connection, you can even use it in a connected care system to get second opinion. Again, making healthcare also much more inclusive and accessible. Now, the last example that I wanted to share here, or the last bucket really, is about the business models. So access-based business models. We really are in a transformation to become an integrated service and solutions provider, also with many of our people working also on the software side of things. But as Carrie pointedly put it, it's not about buying the hammer, it's about getting the nail in the wall. It's about curing patients, having the first time right diagnostics, supporting caregivers with making the right choices, personalized care pathways. So offering these solutions are a great way, again, to take and keep ownership about materials rather than having transactional linear business models. For instance, one example is monitoring as a service, which we have launched in a couple of large-scale hospital chains, also in the United States. Czech is one of them. Many more to come. Think about diagnostics as a service. With that, I just want to stop the kaleidoscopic brief survey of the examples but also the challenges there. I just wanted to assure you this is something that's also really exciting for our employees. It's a direct link with the purpose that I mentioned at the beginning, very inspiring. Philips is an innovation and purpose-driven company, so our people love challenges, especially if they also see what the impact is in terms of making healthcare more accessible and reducing our ecological footprint. So it's a great way to engage our employees and fantastic to be part of that journey. And of course, we are also working together with many third parties, including our suppliers, many of which have eco-design capabilities, help us with the material choice or the component design. but also on the public side and with NGOs. One of the things that I want to mention in the context of circular economy is, for instance, HCES, the platform to accelerate circular economy, which we have launched together with the World Economic Forum. Ellen MacArthur and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation are board members as knowledge partners, as is Circle, for instance. There are a couple of governments, including the Dutch governments, Danish governments, Japanese governments, multinational companies, small companies. So it's a fantastic action-oriented platform that really helps to address topics that and share best practices and really drive practical projects also, like setting up an e-waste recycling scheme that is actually scalable for Africa, where we focus on Nigeria, or exchanging best practices between large capital equipment producers. Now, with that, I just want to close with a quote from my fellow countryman, Albert Einstein, who said, those who have the privilege to know also have the duty to act. I think we all know how important this is. And people on the call typically have the insights and the academic degree, the passion and the knowledge that I would count you into the knowing. So I think we have a chance to act that I want to leave it. Carrie, maybe back to you.
I'll turn it over to Joanna, I believe.
Yeah, so we actually have 5 minutes in the main room left, which is great. So we can have questions. And because of how the settings are, I would first invite the other speakers who will be on the panels to ask questions if you have any to Robert. And if not, I'm gonna enable the chat for all participants and you can ask questions in the chat.
Yeah, and maybe Joanna, if you can help me by reading them or picking some.
I can pick some out and ask them. Yeah.
Yeah, happy to take questions.
Joe, I have a question. Should I shoot it across? Yeah, verbally or non-verbally? Are we doing verbal? Excellent. Robert, thank you so much. That was fantastic to see in terms of how you've structured the strategy moving forward towards circular economy. I had a quick question on the design implementation of a lot of these products, because I think my background is design. I'm an architect, and I guess for me, the fundamental reason why we are where we are is because of designers, unfortunately, and the mistakes that we've made along the way. You could argue that we maybe perhaps weren't informed in some circumstances, but I think this is a design brief to move us towards a circular economy. So when I look at some of those slides on your products in terms of recycled content and plastics going into the products themselves, fantastic to hear. But how do those products actually get recycled at the end of their life? So how are you designing for reverse engineering? How are you designing for components to be split? There's a lot of different materials in those images of different materials being either welded or jointed together. And we know that in a monomaterial world, this would all be very simple in terms of end-of-life recyclability, where we have very clear material streams, where you have products that can go into any one of them and have a very good likelihood of being 100% recycled and come back in terms of material feed flow. But what do you do in terms of your very complex products, which kettles or any of those parts which have multiple requirements for different materials? Besides putting in recycled content, what do you see in terms of the future? Because, you know, maybe that's where designers need to help you out further in terms of how are you actually designing this to be recyclable at the end of its own life?
Yeah, a great question. Thanks. And of course, you could fill an entire PhD seminar or half a year with of lectures. That's fantastic. I think just the short answer is designers have a critical role to play because they are the interface, I think, also between the technology people and the market insights, the consumer insights. As you said earlier, or it has been said earlier also, it really is circularity is a systems property. So it's not just a product property. Part of it is designing or with recycling technologies in mind that are not even there yet in the market, right? Or anticipating that or hoping for them to come, or co-designing these recycling capabilities. Part of that is being smart about the materials are there, setting standards also, for instance, agreeing on specific grades of plastics, avoiding gluing them together, as you said, in a way that cannot be separated, not coating, for instance, things. So we have now had the first batch of color-true post-consumer recycled plastics that actually can be used for grip elements or handles of household apparatus. You don't need extra coating on that. If consumers are willing to accept these type of things, they are partially also translucent, so you can do all kinds of great stuff with it. And not coating them means you have a real chance to actually recycle them in a much better way than stuff that is actually coated or component contains multiple components. So there are many different elements of it. You talked about repairability also. We did a study last year also where we specifically looked in how much steps it takes to reach specific components in a machine or apparatus that is more likely to fail than others. And then to redesign these equipment in such a way that you actually reach these parts much easier, and therefore increasing the recycle and repairability, also very important. I think, Carrie, you mentioned in the beginning the sharing economy for toothbrushes, not very likely, but actually I think there is already sharing economy to some extent, at least if I look at my kids or so, they share the handle, right? But they have their own head of it. So if you now think about brush heads as a service, and make sure that you can also take this back and dispose this in a responsible way. There's all kinds of creative thinking going on, but repairability is one of the key things, of course, and being mindful about connections between materials. And again, designers have a key role to play in there. So if any designers are here, of course, you are aware of this responsibility and also the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I was over-optimistic with how many questions we would get in. There was a great question with a great answer, but now we're going to go into breakout rooms, so we're not cutting the panel short. I'm going to assort the speakers into the 2 rooms. So it will be Anna Garcia, Jean Homeke, Richard Berger, and Safia Qureshi in room 1, and Anne Kirby,